There's no doubt in my mind that rabbis tonight will talk about October 7th and the year it's been for the Jewish people in Israel and throughout the world. I also think it's safe to suggest that we've been trying to figure out how to begin such a sermon during the most difficult time of Jewish life since 1939. Earlier in my rabbinate, I remember reading about Saul Teplitz, and he was a late conservative rabbi and remarkable orator who understood how to capture moments of pain during the Hagim. He said, "The season for greetings has arrived. By word of mouth or through printed card, people convey good wishes to their family and to their friends. Happy New Year runs the greeting. But this is only true in English. The traditional Hebrew greeting, Shana Tova, literally means a good year. The happy and the good are not always synonymous. It is possible for some people to be happy with what is not good." For this new year of 5785, Rabbi Teplitz's words, they convey our paradox. This congregation has been through a painful and emotional roller coaster the past year. So I want to begin this sermon with compassion and comfort for this temple family. Because on this bema, the long past 12 months, I've often said that Jews post-October 7th, we are living two lives. The first life, this is what embodies the personal human condition. It's the good, it's the bad, it's the stuff that life throws at us. It's the stress from work, or it's the joy we get spending time with family. It's also the uncertainty about our finances and our health. It's the ebb and flow of everyday realities, which can be hard enough. And that's why we always look forward to receiving the spiritual gift of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur provide us. A perfect prescription that allows us to love again, to hope again, to forgive and to be forgiven, and the chance to improve our imperfections and repair relationships. Yet this remedy is only for the first part of life. But now we're forced to take on a second life. And that second life is being Jewish post-October 7th. It makes the teshuvah process seem all but impossible. For this reason, I am adamant with myself to be intentionally mindful about my remarks tonight so that they can provide the compassion and comfort that is needed more than ever. Because for the first time in 85 years, we are forced to experience Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur while living with these two lives. I never thought that I would say this as the following, as our rabbi. These high holidays, they are going to be spiritually brutal for us. The cruelty of this year's Jewish lunar calendar is maddening. Tonight, we welcome a new Jewish year. And in 5 short days, we will be together Monday night at the JCC to commemorate the first anniversary of October 7th. And then a few days later, that Friday night, we're going to be back here praying to get into the book of life well lived. I also think about the liturgy that we will recite and we will hear. And for the first time as a rabbi, and frankly my entire life being a Jew, Segments of the liturgical poem, the Unatana Tokef, that we recite on Rosh Hashanah morning and Yom Kippur morning, became a horrid reality during the hours of October 7th. Who will be taken before their time? Who by fire? Who by beast? Who by war? Who by strangling? And who by stoning? And we could take a moment here because it nearly shakes us at our core. But here's something we all know. We cannot continue to live our lives focusing solely on October 7th. This isn't the way to fulfill a complete Jewish life. This isn't the way we live happy and meaningful lives. If we want to empower the next generation of Jews who will love their Judaism, who will love God, who will love Torah, who will love Israel and Zionism, we must find a doable prescription to remember October 7th and the year it's been for us, but also to find the strength to live again. From the depths of my soul, and especially throughout this long year, I really thought that our remedy was to rely upon our history. I genuinely believe that we can learn and frankly be inspired to as how our ancestors pivoted from calamity after calamity. I want to tell this congregation tonight that I was so wrong. I really thought the answer was to intellectualize how we responded to the destructions of both temples in early antiquity, to talk about the persecution and subjugation of medieval Europe, the pogroms, and the Holocaust. I thought that we could be emboldened to how Jews used the power of Torah Lishma, Torah study, and the Beit Midrash to safeguard and advance Jewish tradition. But the crux is that we are far too removed from events that happened 2,000 years ago. And I also want to say, we are far too removed with events that happened 85 years ago. And October 7th, it's too painfully current for us even to consider such an intellectual or academic response. Finally, after a true and personal cheshbon of nefesh, my own self-examination process, I believed I found the right path. It's this: we haven't been able to mourn yet. And for us to go on from October 7th, we need to lament. We need to cry. We need to grieve. And we need to mourn together, because this is the first thing that we have always done when we face such death and destruction. A perfect teaching is that Judaism understands Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur as the spiritual death of our imperfections to then start the new year spiritually alive with that clean slate. And if the high holidays symbolically represent our spiritual death, it is most appropriate to recite Kohelet 3, a beautiful selection of scripture often used during funerals, because it captures the different experiences of life. For everything, there is a season, a time for every experience under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to tear down, and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silent and a time to speak, a time for loving, a time for hating, a time for milchama, a time for war, and a time for shalom, a time for peace. We know that in Judaism, our rabbis taught us not to mourn too long or obsessively. They instituted a path to ensure we can live in the world even with the void in our hearts, observing the 7-day Shiva period, followed by the 30-day period of Shloshim, then completed by the 11th month of Shana, and the mitzvah to recite the Mourner's Kaddish during the Yartzeit anniversary. But this type for mourning, October 7th, is different. It's novel. This type of mourning is so complex and so multi-layered because we haven't been here before. At this moment in time, in nearly 9 decades. This mourning is so painful and utterly offensive when we truly think about it and say it out loud. We are not just mourning the horrific slaughter of 1,200 Israelis and foreign nationals on October 7th, the hostages who were murdered while in captivity, or the brave IDF soldiers who died fighting for us, Israel, and the Jewish people. In addition, we need to mourn the utter breakdown of Western society, the total collapse of enlightened values that allowed anti-Semitism to reach all-time highs since 1939, wreaking havoc nearly everywhere, on the streets, in medical organizations and in medical journals, international music competitions, and harassing people outside Holocaust centers. We mourn those who believe that artificial intelligence fabricated the massacre, including the slaughtering of babies and burning Holocaust survivors alive. And at the same time, we mourn those who believe that October 7th was real and wanted to be repeated, not just in Israel, but in America. We mourn how our universities became a hotbed of anti-Semitism and a center of violence to our Jewish students. We must mourn how the media bought into and easily Hamas propaganda, peddling Hamas lies without any fact-checking, and their greatest offense, attempting to justify a moral equivalence between Israel, a Western and democratic country, and Hamas, a terrorist organization with its goals to destroy all of Israel and the Jewish people. We need to mourn how the United Nations, the Human Rights Watch, the International Red Cross, and the bevy of humanitarian organizations who egregiously failed to live up to their ideals and values because Jewish lives and suffering did not matter. We mourn the apathy and total disregard of women's organizations who did nothing for Jewish girls and Jewish women, who experienced the most barbaric and grotesque acts of sexual violence. We mourn the silence from some members of the interfaith community. We mourn how these leaders participated in the pro-Hamas rallies downtown, using their own distorted understanding of justice to march for pure evil. And finally, so many of you came to me for this one because it's so hard for us. We mourn the silence from our greater community partners, those for whom we thought were our friends, allies, our university partners, and for whom we showed up during their despair. But mourning does need to come to an end, because it needs to, despite it being so hard. And we all know that this has been the most agonizing year for us since the Holocaust. We will forever be haunted by the images we saw on that Saturday morning and what followed next. And I just want to name a few. The kidnapping of the Bibas family. The video of Hamas terrorizing Larry Albag, Agam Berger, Danielle Gilboa, Karina Erev, Naomi Levy at Nahal Oz. And if we can remember seeing this image of Naomi Levy, seeing her bloody sweatpants in the streets of Gaza. The first responders, the police that came to the Nova Music Festival, we can hear them in Hebrew. He meta, he meta, he meta. She's dead, she's dead, she's dead. The southern kibbutzim look like infernos with the bullet holes. And the celebration of Gazans upon receiving kidnapped Jews. And even as maddening as it is, the mourning needs to come to an end. It needs to come to an end for them, and all the more so, we are obligated to remember them, and especially to live for them. And if we can, it needs to come for an end for us too. Because we need to hope again. We need to love again. We need to feel safe again. We need to be happy again. And as Kohelet reminds us, we need to dance again. On August 9, 2001, Hamas carried out a terrorist attack at a pizzeria in Jerusalem, murdering 16 people and wounding hundreds. This was during the Second Intifada. This attack absolutely crushed Israel's soul. But Israel found the strength to pick themselves up and experience the joys of life. And so "We Will Dance Again" was first chanted as the battle cry to reinforce that terrorism will never define nor defeat the Jewish heart and soul. And the battle cry, "We will dance again," has returned to Israel's core identity. "We will dance again" is the charge to live again. It's this expression that is found nearly everywhere in Israel. It's on billboards, it's on posters, it's on t-shirts, and even Israelis are tattooing it to themselves. It's taken to heed what Kohelet tells us to do. Live. It's an expression of advocacy and remembrance. It's what Mia Shem, a survivor of the Nova Music Festival in Hostage, wants us to do. Dance again. Even though we are still at war, and there are still hostages, an attack by Iran yesterday, we know that Judaism and the Jewish people will forever change because of October 7th. But Judaism requires us to be with the living. as rescued hostage Noah Argamani said while celebrating her birthday. It's not ideal that we're having this party while they're still at war in background, while soldiers are on the battlefield, while there are over 109 hostages there in Gaza, including my partner, Abinathan Or, who we miss terribly. But at the same time, I'm happy to celebrate life itself with all of you, to remember what we have to value every day in this life. We have to celebrate every moment. That's why we are here. In conclusion, I want this congregation to know that dancing again, this goes for me too. As your rabbi and spiritual leader, it took me months to figure out how to live in this world to see the good. Part of me felt that I had to remain in this perpetual state of sadness because I genuinely believed the world abandoned us once more. I couldn't get past not just Saturday morning in October, but the wrath of hate that immediately followed. But once the hostages were returned to their families in November, and after seeing the joy from the 4 rescued hostages in June, I want this congregation to know it reinforced my obligation to re-engage, to seek the good in life with my wonderful family, this congregation, and the hundreds of strangers in the community who brought their support and presence to us. And I am honored and eager to participate in the rebirth of the Jewish people. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, of blessed memory, said it perfectly. I think of Judaism as an ode to joy. Like Beethoven, Jews have known suffering, isolation, hardships, and rejections. Yet they never lacked the religious courage to rejoice. A people can know that insecurity and still feel joy is one that can never be defeated, for its spirits can never be broken, nor its hopes destroyed. As individuals, may we aspire to the goodness that leads to happiness, but as a part of a moral and spiritual community, even in hard times, we find ourselves lifted on the wings of joy. The happy and the good, they're not always synonymous. But this is not our final chapter. Our book will never end. Chapters will always be written for generation to come. Because even at our darkest moments, we will dance again.